Thank you all for coming. We know you had a lot of choices on different sessions. We know this is the last day of reInvent. And I think Dave, Yuri, and I just wanted to say thank you for picking our session. We know you had, again, a lot of great reInvent choices out there. So thanks for sticking around and being here today with us. And we'll do our very best to make sure that this is something that's interesting and worthwhile for your time. So thank you. My name's Pete Imming. I work on the S3 product management team. I've been at AWS for a little over 3 years, and joining me today is Dave DeLuca.
Hey everyone, I'm a storage solutions architect. I cover public sector, and I'm in the Boston area.
And Yuri Zarubin. Yuri, what do you do?
I'm a principal engineer in S3.
Very good. So we've actually got some, I think we tallied it up, over 50 years of data protection experience and storage experience here on stage. So hopefully we'll give you some good advice and prescriptive advice on S3 and how you can take advantage of some of the optional features that are in S3 for data protection. What we are not going to cover today is security. So if data protection means to you IAM policies or encryption, KMS encryption, server-side encryption, this is not the session for you. So we won't be offended if that's what you were looking for and you go to a different session. But if you're here to learn about durability, availability, resiliency in S3, and then the optional layers of data protection on top of that, things like replication, object lock, object versioning, this is the session for you. So if you have a bucket in S3, and you're looking to provide additional layers of protection for that data on top of that, you're in the right place. You're in good hands. Okay. That being said, here's going to be our agenda. We are going to be covering over why we think S3, Amazon S3, is the safest place to store your data. We'll give you a little bit of an insider view of how we architect S3. We had some questions already as folks were walking in about how S3 obtains those 11 nines of durability. We'll be covering that. Dave will be covering that specifically. We're also going to be covering some of the additional layers of data protection. Yuri's going to be going into a deep dive on some of our data protection features and why you need to use those in addition to our amazing 11 nines of durability and our 4 nines of availability. So we'll be going into those specific features, and then we'll be showing you a little bit about S3 storage lens. Anybody using S3 storage lens in here today? One? Wow, okay. All right, how about object lock? Anybody using object lock here? 1, 2, 3. Object versioning? Okay, very good. How about S3 replication in either cross-region or single region? Okay, still, all right, you're gonna have. All right, and then we'll be talking about how to bring all of that together and even layering on additional services beyond what S3 offers natively, such as an external backup solution for your data in S3. So that's really what we're going to be covering. We're going to spend the next 45 minutes together. We'll do our best here to keep you guys engaged and hopefully informed. So again, thank you for your time. All right, Dave, I think you're going to be talking about now why Amazon S3 is the safest place to store your data.
Indeed. Thank you, Pete. So S3's been around for about 16 years and ultimately really revolutionized cloud storage. The unbelievable part today is that there are ultimately millions of customers using S3. And believe it or not, 280 trillion objects is what is stored today. So we do believe S3 is the safest place to store your data. And we're going to take a closer look here at how we back up that claim. This was a question that we already got. So to understand this, we really want to talk about the basics of the AWS infrastructure and how S3 utilizes it. So we have the concept of a region. A region is just a physical location in a geographic location around the world. Within those regions, we have availability zones, or you'll see them listed as AZs. Each AZ has one or sometimes many data centers. They have independent power, cooling, networking, and they're connected through high-speed links. In fact, AWS ultimately has more regions with 3 or more availability zones for high availability and more points of presence and edge locations delivering low latency options than any other cloud provider. So this infrastructure is common to AWS services in general. I'm sure you've seen this slide during the week. What makes S3 unique is how it uses this architecture, because we ultimately are storing data across multiple failure domains. Let's take a little closer look at how we do that. So S3 is highly resilient and durable by default. In fact, it's 11 nines of durability. Let's look at how we achieve this. So you upload a file to S3. In S3, we will refer to that as an object. S3 is then going to redundantly store that object across multiple devices across a minimum of 3 availability zones before it returns a success. S3 uses a series of checksums, secure hash algorithms, and cycle redundancy checks to verify data integrity. And it's performing those checksums both at rest and looking to repair any disparity with all the redundant data that we have. In fact, S3 is ultimately performing over 4 billion checksum computations per second. One quick mention of storage classes. This is going to come in because when we talk about features like versioning and replication, we can make use of storage classes to help control cost. And that's all a storage class really is. It's just a means of making sure that we can provide you the lowest cost depending on how often you're going to access the data and how long you intend to store the data. Last year, we introduced Glacier Instant Retrieval. This is intended for long-term data that's not going to be accessed frequently, but it's still online. It still has the same milliseconds of latency that standard and frequent access have. For data, if you don't know your data's pattern, if it's going to be changing or you just aren't sure of what it's going to be, we recommend intelligent tiering. It will ultimately tier the data accordingly based on how it's used and work its way to the most effective tier. The biggest thing I want to mention, being a field SA, I get this question a lot. In fact, I got it about 4 times this week. Storage class is set at the object level. It's not a bucket setting. And in fact, a bucket can have multiple objects from any storage class. So you don't have to create a new bucket if you want to make use of Glacier Deep Archive. It is set per object. And you can also set lifecycle policies. So after a certain amount of time, the data should tier down. I can even use it to manage deletions. So Pete, if S3 is so durable, what exactly do we need to protect against?
Well, S3 is there to honor your request to put data into S3 as well as to delete data out of S3. We don't know your intent. So part of our service is designed to carry out your request unambiguously. So when you make a request to put data, we honor that, and when you make a request to delete data, we have to honor that. We don't know if that's accidental. We don't know if that's intentional. We don't know if that is malicious. So what Yuri's going to be talking about is a feature in S3 that's optional to layer on the first layer of data protection that really covers how we can protect your data against accidental deletions. So this is really what we're going to be focusing on here for the next part is human error. Mistakes happen, but S3 can't determine your intention when you issue a delete command to us. You no longer have to worry about the physical security of your storage. We wake up every day and we focus on durability of everything in S3, people, processes, and technology. But we cannot read minds. We don't know what the intent of a deletion request is. So therefore, we have to offer safeguards to help you control what happens when a delete request comes in. That's where the human error is really focused on. And what we think of in terms of layers of data protection, it starts obviously with your data, and then we start to look at what additional layers we can put on top of that. That begins with IAM. And IAM is going to be that first layer where you're going to be able to grant access and control access to your data. By default, S3 is secure. By default, you have to grant access to the data. But what if you have granted someone access? What is there to help prevent an accidental deletion from becoming a major problem for your business? That's really where we're going to be transitioning to Yuri to talk about S3 object versioning. That's sort of our foundation, and that's where a lot of our data protection features really start. So from accidental deletion, we'll be then looking at more malicious deletions. Now you have someone that is authorized to access the data, but that person has a malicious intent to damage or delete that data. We still have to authorize and honor the request to delete, but how can we then prevent that from actually becoming a permanent delete? And we'll talk about object lock as one of the additional optional layers that you can layer on top of object versioning to provide that prevention of permanent deletion. We'll also be asking Yuri again to cover S3 replication. I'm really excited to have him talk to you about this. Yuri built our S3 replication feature, and we've got some exciting things to talk to you about how that works today. So from there, we'll be covering a capability and a new feature. It's actually one of my favorite features to talk about. It's S3 Storage Lens. And so as we cover kind of our different layers here of protection, you're going to need a way to audit your current environment, what you have today, and then how do you look and understand across multiple buckets and multiple accounts all the way up to your AWS organization level what features that are on this exact slide that you have enabled. What percentage of your data is replicated? What percentage of your data is locked? What percentage of your data has versioning enabled? S3 Storage Lens will be showing you a little bit about that dashboard. It's a feature that's available to you all today. You can get it up and running today, by the time you leave here. 14 days of historical data ready to go at no additional charge in your account right now. So if you look on the left-hand side of your console, you'll see Storage Lens listed there. Give it a try if you're not using it today. I did not see a lot of hands go up when we asked if you were using Storage Lens. Give it a shot. It's no additional charge with a number of additional metrics around data protection that you can view the status of all of your data when it comes to object versioning, object lock, object replication, MFA delete. So a number of our data protection features are already in there. So that is one of our kind of prescriptive recommendations that we hope you take away from this session today and go and implement very quickly. Again, no additional charge for Storage Lens for the existing metrics that we have for data protection. Then we'll be kind of transitioning into some takeaways and kind of wrapping things up. So that's essentially our multi-layers of data protection here. And now we're going to turn it over to Yuri to talk more about accidental deletion and object versioning of where we start. So Yuri, what if I want to protect my data against human errors?
Well, Pete, luckily S3 has a solution for you, and it's called S3 versioning. Now, personally, S3 versioning is one of my favorite features, and the reason for that is because it is so simple to use. That's right, folks. No VPCs or IAM roles to configure here, just a simple toggle that, when clicked, protects your bucket from accidental deletes and overwrites. Now, I just want to poll the audience here. Raise your hand if you manage, own, or administer an S3 bucket.
All those hands should go up. Let's see those hands. All right. Okay. Awesome.
All right. Just keep them high. Now, if you currently use versioning, keep your hand up high. Otherwise, lower your hand. All right. So about half the room. My goal today with this talk is to double that number. So I want everybody by the end of this day to go home and enable versioning. Now, as a member of the S3 engineering team, I can tell you that we have a lot of our own data. And just like you, we store this data in S3. And versioning is one of those features that we recommend every single service team to enable on their buckets. And that's because we ourselves want to have the peace of mind that if something goes wrong, if we accidentally delete or overwrite our data, then we have a chance to recover from that mistake. All right, so that's enough sales talk. Let's talk about how versioning actually works. So when you enable versioning on your bucket, whenever you modify an object, you will actually create a new version of that object. And S3 maintains the entire version history in what we call a version stack. So for example, here we have an object with the key cat.jpg. Perhaps you're storing cat pictures. And there's currently two versions there, version 1 and version 2. And it looks like there's a third version that's about to be put. Now, by default, when you read an object, S3 will return the most recent version that's at the top of the stack, or what we call the latest version. But if you made a mistake and you need to recover to a previous version, you can always do that because those previous versions are always there. And S3 preserves the entire version history, and there's no limit to the number of versions a single object may have. Now, what about deletes? When you delete an object in a version bucket, nothing actually gets deleted by default. Instead, a special type of object called a delete marker is placed on top of the version stack. If your application attempts to read the object, it will get an error, likely a 404. And that makes sense because the object was deleted. But if this delete was a mistake, if you accidentally deleted your cat picture, you can always recover because, like I said, the entire version history is there and you can access the data. So right about now, you might be thinking, is there any way for me to delete the data that I do not want? And the answer is yes. If you include the version ID as part of the delete request, it will permanently delete that specific version. But doing this is pretty cumbersome, especially for large buckets. And none of us actually clean up previous versions manually. What most of us do, and you should do too, is enable an S3 lifecycle policy. An S3 lifecycle policy allows you to clean up prior versions, say after 90 days. But the number of days that you want to give you a chance to recover is completely up to you. So for everyone here that later in the day is going to enable versioning, make sure you also have a generous, non-current expiration lifecycle policy enabled on your bucket too. Okay, so versioning protects your buckets from accidental deletes and overwrites. But what if you want to make it impossible for your data to be deleted? What if you want to protect your data against malicious activity?
Thanks, Yuri. So against malicious activity, our answer is object lock. I don't think too many hands went up earlier when Pete asked who was using it. There were a couple. Ultimately, object lock is how we can make our storage immutable so that it can't be deleted. It's going to follow a worm model, a write once, read many model. So this ultimately helps you protect against permanent deletes or overwrites. It's also very good if you have to meet certain requirement standards. So things like SEC 17A4, CFTC, and FINRA. Now, object lock is also enabled at the bucket level, and I'll show you a little bit more about the configuration of that in a moment. There are multiple object lock types. So first, there are two modes, and in each mode, you would specify a time period. So it could be as short as a day, it could be as long as 99 years. If you choose governance, governance means that most users can't delete the object and they can't change any of the settings unless they have special permission to do so. So your administrators maybe can do this, or maybe you just want to set it up as a test to make sure that nothing is going to change on the application side, knowing that you can remove it. The real protection, especially against malware or other malicious activity, is compliance mode. Compliance mode means you cannot delete the object, you cannot change the mode, and you cannot change the date, no matter who you are. The fact that your account owns the bucket, the fact that you have root level permission in the AWS account, you still can't do it. So this gets to what Pete was saying about even if someone had malicious intent, no matter what their permission is, it's still protected. Obviously use this one with care because during that time period, you cannot change it. Now, separate from this is a legal hold. So a legal hold could be applied at any time, but it's on demand. I don't set a period for a legal hold. I can put it on if I have permission to do so, and I can remove it at any point in the future if I have permission to do so. So it's like governance mode, but more of an on-demand. And these can coexist. So I could have something that is set with either governance or compliance mode for a fixed period of time and have a legal hold on top of it. And then lastly, we've been talking so far about new objects going into a bucket. What if I have a bucket that already has objects and I want to go and apply legal hold settings to them? We could use batch operations. Batch operations would allow us, amongst other things, to go through and change the object lock settings for millions of objects in a single job. Let's talk a little bit about the configuration, because it is kind of a two-step thing. That when you create the bucket, this is one of the options that you would see in the GUI. It's in advanced settings. And of course, you could do this programmatically. You could do this from the REST API, SDK, and CLI as well. When Yuri gave his versioning talk, remember it said the foundation? And this is why. Versioning has to be enabled. If it's not, the screenshot is showing that object lock is going to take the liberty of enabling it for you. You also need to do this at the time the bucket is created, although if it's an existing bucket, you can reach out to AWS support and they can enable it for you. So the bucket's been created and object lock is on. So what this means is at this point, we're capable of using object lock. It's not going to work by default just yet, but if I go to upload an object, I now have a couple of commands that are going to be valid. So object lock mode, that's going to be either governance or compliance, and that object lock retain until, that's the value that we talked about that said for how long should it be valid. There is a separate command, which is how we can enable or disable legal hold. We can also do that one from the console as well. Now that is only going to affect new objects in which you explicitly define an object lock setting. Once the bucket's created, you can go to the Properties tab and configure a default. So what I'm showing here is that by default, compliance mode is going to be on for 10 days. That'll affect any new object going into the bucket unless you explicitly state something different when the object has been uploaded. Notice legal hold is not listed here because legal hold is an on-demand activity. We don't set it as a default behavior. Keep in mind this is optional. I've seen cases, particularly with backup apps, where they want object lock on, but they don't want the default. When the backup app writes the data, it is going to make sure it sets that value at the time of the upload. Also, this does integrate with other features. So I've actually been saying all along that it affects an object. In fact, it affects a particular version of an object. This is stored in the metadata of that object and applies to each individual version. Yuri mentioned lifecycle policies. Lifecycle policies will still work, they will still be honored, but if we use the lifecycle policy to attempt to delete a version of an object, while it's still protected by object lock, it won't be deleted. Object lock will still win. And lastly, replication. If you're using S3 replication, the object lock information is sent to the other side as well. It's maintained. This is just a visualization of what we were talking about, that this particular object is going to be protected by compliance mode from T0 up to T10, because I told it to be there for 10 days. And then at some point in the future, we put a legal hold on it as well. So what do you think is going to happen if we attempt to delete the object right here? Will it be able to be deleted?
No? Yes? What do you guys think?
What if I have administrative level privileges? What if it's my bucket? Can I delete it at this moment? No. Compliance mode is protecting it. It is under the protection of object lock regardless of the user. If we jump ahead a little bit, what about this point in time? And still can't delete it because there's a legal hold. Now, if I have permission, I can remove the legal hold, but in this example, I haven't done that yet. So either way, the object is going to be protected, and the real message here was that these two can coexist. It's not an either or, it could be one, the other, or both. So I'm going to pass back to Yuri. Yuri, what if we want to protect against regional disruptions?
Well, Dave, the first thing you want to do is you want to create a second copy of your data in a different AWS region using S3 Replication. Now, I myself have spent 5 years working on this feature. maintaining the code, writing the code, designing it, launching it. So I am super excited to share everything it has to offer with you today. 100 petabytes, that seems like a pretty big number, but what does it represent? And I'll give you a hint. It is the number of bytes replicated around the world.
Not just cat JPEGs?
Not just cat JPEGs. Database backups, cat pictures, you name it. But replicated per what? Raise your hand if you think this is the number of bytes that we replicate globally around the world per year. How about per month? One person? How about per week? A few more? How about per day? All right, well, maybe one day. But no, this is the number of 100 petabytes, is the number of bytes we replicate per week today. We suspect that S3 Replication may be one of the largest asynchronous data replication systems on Earth. And so I want to start with the basics today. How do you configure replication? And you can do that in 3 steps using the console. First, you select the source bucket. So here I've got a bucket in US East 2. Second, you select a destination. Mine is in US West 2. And third, to make sure that your data is replicated in a secure manner, you gotta provide us with an IAM role. Now I know we all struggle with configuring permissions, myself included. I'm sure Pete's not that great at it either.
No.
But the S3 console does really make it easy with the option to create the role for you. I use this all the time, and I highly recommend it, especially if you need a replication. Now, if you're an expert, you can configure replication by writing the policy yourself. And then use various automation tools such as the CDK, CloudFormation, or Terraform to provision replication on your buckets for you. So in my example here, I've got replication set up between US East 2 and US West 2. Once I do this, every new object that I put into the US East 2 bucket will be automatically replicated to US West 2. This object will be replicated asynchronously. So that means that there is some latency between the time that I put the object in the source and the time that it's available in the destination. Now the data is encrypted in transit, and data integrity is maintained between the source to the destination by various object checksums that we compare. Now, a common question is asked, what happens if the link is broken? What happens, for example, if the destination, the US West 2, is down? Well, what's awesome about S3 Replication is that it just simply does not give up. It will not rest until the data is replicated successfully. Let's use this as an example. Let's say US West 2 goes down. Well, replication is going to probably fail. We're going to see lots of errors. We're going to be retrying. And a large backlog is going to begin to build in the source. Once US West 2 is back online, replication will make sure that every single object that failed to replicate during that outage is replicated to the destination. How about the source? What happens if the source goes down? Well, it's more or less the same thing. What's important to understand is that when you have a replication policy set on the source, whenever you get a 200 back from S3 on the put, so in other words, S3 said, yes, your object is durably stored. And if that object is eligible for replication, then its replication status will be set to pending. And if it's pending, that means that that object will be replicated to the destination eventually. Now, replication, there is a way for replication to fail. But the only way for that to happen is if there's a configuration error. For example, what happens if you went and deleted the destination bucket? Well, then of course, we can't replicate that data. And in that case, the replication status will be set to fail. That object will not be replicated. But otherwise, if it's a transient error, a networking issue, some sort of a transient problem, replication guarantees that your object will eventually be replicated, and its replication status will be set to completed. Now, what I love most about replication is that it has this rich capability that can accommodate all sorts of use cases. For example, suppose you don't want to replicate the entire bucket. There's only a small section of your objects that you actually want to replicate. So you can filter the object set using either the prefix, or you can do that using tags. Now, I've already said that you can replicate to a different region. You can also replicate to a bucket in the same region. You can replicate to a bucket even in a different AWS account. And this is especially important if you want to protect your data against bad actors. Suppose just by chance one of your accounts is compromised. Well, you've got your secondary data set in a different account, maybe even in a different region. You can replicate your data into a different storage class. Common use case, for example, is backup. Your backup doesn't have to be in an online storage class. It can be in an archive storage class, such as Glacier. And what's cool, the coolest part, I think, is that you can replicate your data to multiple buckets. In fact, you can replicate your source bucket to up to 27 different destinations. So that's basically 27 different buckets, 27 different regions, 27 different AWS accounts, 27 different storage classes, if we have that many, maybe one day. And this rich capability allows you to implement a backup strategy of your choice. How many of you have heard of the 3-2-1 backup rule here? All right, several backup aficionados here. Awesome. So the 3-2-1 rule broadly states that you should have 3 copies of your data. First, you're going to have your primary copy. Then you're going to have a secondary copy that's close by for quick recovery. And then you're going to have a third copy, preferably off-site, preferably in a different region, account, stored somewhere away. And that's going to be the copy of last resort in case you can't recover from the secondary. So with replication, you can implement the 3-2-1 rule or any backup strategy, really. For example, here I've got my primary bucket in US East 2 in account 1. I'm then replicating it to a secondary bucket in US East 2 in the same account. And I'm replicating to a tertiary copy in US West 2 in a secondary account. And so that helps me recover in case the account 1 gets compromised. I've always got a copy of my data tucked away in account 2. Earlier on, I mentioned that by default, when you enable replication, only new objects get replicated. But what about existing data? Well, we have a solution for that as well. It's called batch replication that we've launched earlier this year. And I'm not going to go too much into batch replication, but it basically leverages batch operations to perform a backfill of your data. And the easiest way to get started is when you configure replication using the console. After you're done, this dialog box is going to pop up. And it's going to ask you if you want to replicate your existing objects. Just click yes, and it will create a batch operations job that's going to scan your source bucket. It's going to find all of those objects that haven't been replicated, and it will replicate them for you. Lastly, if you have strict requirements for how quickly you want to replicate your data, then you will want to enable replication time control. RTC, or replication time control, provides you with an SLA where 99.9% of your objects are replicated in 50 minutes or less. Now keep in mind, 50 minutes is the upper bound. The vast majority of objects actually get replicated in seconds. If you're replicating cat pictures like Pete, that's probably going to be replicated in seconds. If you're replicating large backups, terabytes, objects that are terabytes in size, then that's likely going to take several minutes. Now, if you're using something like RTC, then you probably have a recovery point objective. And when you have a recovery point objective, you typically want to have some way of managing that failover. And this is the purpose of this next tool that Pete is going to talk about.
Thanks, Jerry. So we've covered a lot. We've covered object versioning, our foundation. We covered object lock. Dave covered object lock, which has become really the industry de facto standard for immutable cloud storage. Yuri covered S3 Replication, which we believe is the world's largest asynchronous data copy engine. What we introduced this week, though, was an additional feature on top of those capabilities called S3 Multi-Region Access Point Failover Controls. That's a long name, I know. If we think of this, though, as essentially a global endpoint above your existing replicated buckets, you now have the ability to control failover. Yuri has built an excellent, world-class replication engine, but that still leaves your data in multiple buckets, each with their own bucket name in different regions. If you need to then fail over your applications to one of those buckets, how do you do that today? You typically, for the last 16 years with S3, have had to talk to a bucket in a region every single time. And if you want to change your clients and your applications to talk to a replica, your replicated copy in a different bucket, you now have to change your application and your clients to go talk to a different bucket in a different region. What we launched this week, and we're really excited about, is the ability now to have a single global endpoint that can span up to 17 different AWS regions, one bucket per region, up to 17 different regions, all with a single global endpoint that can take traffic from a VPC, an application running in a VPC in region A, and allow it to talk to a bucket in region B without any complex VPC peering connections. It can also take traffic over private link. If you have on-premises data centers that you're connecting to AWS through Direct Connect or a VPN over private link with private link on top, you can take that traffic through the same global endpoint. If you have internet-based traffic where you're taking data into S3 or out of S3 over the public internet, this multi-region access point allows you to accelerate that traffic onto the AWS network at the closest point of presence, and we have hundreds of those all around the world. What failover controls allow you to do, though, is control the routing and the traffic through that global endpoint to a region of your choice. Again, up to 17 different regions. You can operate in an active-active configuration. You can operate in an active-passive configuration. And you can fail over if Godzilla comes through. I think that was our launch blog, and cuts an undersea fiber cable, which my friend Ed has told me that happens about 100 times per year. Not Godzilla, maybe, cutting the undersea cables, but undersea cable cuts do happen. And when that does happen, how are you then able to quickly fail over your traffic and reroute that to a different region? This is the feature that allows you to do that now. It does not require any special buckets, no magic buckets. You can use your existing buckets. You can make new buckets. It does not require you to configure replication. If you already have replication rules already there, use them. That replication will continue independently of this feature, but now with failover controls, you can shift your traffic in under 2 minutes to a different region. We won't sever existing connections. We will simply route new requests to the region of your choice, again, up to 17 different regions. To prevent Godzilla attacking a failover, disrupting a failover request of yours, if you press that button in our console now to failover and shift that traffic, we have the failover control plane running in 5 different AWS regions redundantly. You don't need any infrastructure. You don't need a bucket in those regions. But you have the confidence now that you can use any of the 5 regions to initiate a failover request to, and we will honor that and process that request to now shift your traffic to an alternate region of your choice in under 2 minutes that you can now monitor the shift of that traffic in CloudWatch. So this is a feature, again, we launched this week. I think you're the 3rd or 4th group that we've shown this to. We had great turnout for the session this morning on this. So if you're not familiar with this, it works very much like layers of a cake. Again, you can start with your existing buckets that you already have replication on, or you can configure replication through the multi-region access point, and you can sort of crawl, walk, run with this capability. We're really excited about this. We hope you are too. It's something that we've been working on for quite a while, and we were really excited this week to launch it. So hopefully this is of interest. All right. Great. We're on the home stretch. You guys are doing great. What we're going to talk about next is combining features here. So we covered multi-region access points, but we think there's a little more prescriptive guidance that we can give you about how to architect this for the lowest possible cost, with cost optimization happening month after month after month. What we are going to talk to you about here today is the failover capability now can be in an active-passive configuration where your passive region may not be a copy of the data that you want to store in S3 standard. So what we're recommending prescriptively now is to consider having your secondary or tertiary copy in intelligent tiering. So that S3 intelligent tiering storage class allows you to have that data in that passive region, where as that data is no longer accessed, after 30 days, we move that down to an infrequent access storage class and give you a discount. Roughly, I think, 3x. After 90 days, if you haven't accessed that data, we move that into an archive instant access tier. And I think that's roughly a 5x storage cost savings versus standard. So that passive copy now gives you a cost optimization month after month after month. But what happens when you fail over? Intelligent tiering, because we're monitoring the access patterns of your data, when you fail over, now the passive region is the active region. There's no retrieval fees in intelligent tiering, unlike a storage class such as S3 standard infrequent access or Glacier instant retrieval. Those retrieval fees are not something you'll see after you fail over to your passive copy. So we really think that makes an ideal pairing of the storage class with the multi-region access point. And then the final piece of the triangle here is what Yuri talked about with replication time control to give you that 15-minute SLA to replicate that data bidirectionally so that as you fail over from your active to your passive, which is now the new active, you start creating new data. That data, using Yuri's incredible replication engine, is going to be bidirectionally synced back to the original region so that when you fail back, that data is now back in the original primary, ready for you to fail back in under, Dave, how many?
15 minutes.
Replication in under 15 minutes, failover in under 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
All right. So that being said, we've talked a lot about different features. These are optional layers. If you remember our kind of everlasting gobstopper, layers upon layers of optional data protection. What we wanted to talk to you about is storage lens. I gave a little bit of a pep talk about that at the beginning. We're going to give you a little bit more of a push here as well on storage lens. We love it that much. So storage lens, again, is going to be that dashboard that you're going to go on the left-hand side of your console. You're going to enable, have a default dashboard ready to go with 14 days of historical data. You've got metrics that are going to go down to the bucket level by default, but all the way up to the account level and up to the AWS organization level. We do not charge for this base version of storage lens. It's there, ready for you to take advantage of today. And really the main advantage is the features we talked about today from a data protection perspective, but also cost. It'll track your cost of your storage. It'll look at how much data you're storing in S3, again, across buckets in different accounts, all the way up to your AWS organization. What we wanted to kind of focus you on here today is the percentages on the left-hand side on the lower part of this graphic. What percentage of your data right now is replicated? What percentage of your data is object locked? What percentage of it is replicated? What percentage of it is under MFA delete? So this gives you a nice audit, a nice bird's eye view of what you already have today. It gives you a really good indication of what your risk levels are for your organization. And that's one of the reasons why we made the decision to go ahead and enable this with 14 days of historical data and not charge for this. There is an advanced version of Storage Lens that goes down to even to the prefix level, if you need that, with an additional set of, I think, 29 additional metrics, I think, that you get with the advanced version. But start with the base version. We think there's an incredible amount of value there to let you audit what you already have and to understand what your risk levels are for your data. And then optionally choose from the features that Yuri talked about today, that Dave talked about today, and that I talked about today. So this is really one of the things that we were hoping that you would take away from this session, is at least to get Storage Lens going, to give you a bird's eye view of what risk you already have on the data you have in S3. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look here at how that's enabled. Really simple. You can see up at the top there the metric selection. You've got free or advanced. The key word there on the first radio button, free. Normally we are supposed to say no charge, but it says it in the console so I can say it on stage. Hopefully this allows you to kind of believe what I'm telling you, that you can get started today with Storage Lens at no cost. I love that free word being in the console. What we also wanted to show you was the bottom checkbox, because we just before reInvent launched additional data protection capabilities and metrics in Lens. This is the checkbox in Lens to help you understand and help you enable those additional data protection metrics on your replication rules and on your lifecycle and object versioning. So check this out. We'd love your feedback on it, but I think it's a feature. Dave, I mean, you spend a lot of time talking to our customers.
People love it because S3 is vast, right? I mean, even within your own environment, you might have multiple buckets, you might have multiple accounts, you have possibly thousands or millions of objects. It's hard to track things like this. How do I know for sure that it's in the proper storage class? How do I know for sure that things are being protected by object lock? I thought I set it up, but maybe things aren't, I didn't set a default, and maybe things are being uploaded without using object lock. So it's a great single pane of glass, and then we have lots of other tools in S3 when you need to dive deeper. And just to follow up on what Pete said, when we said go and configure it, it's actually there by default. So if you open up the S3 console, look at the left-hand panel, click on Storage Lens, you will see a default dashboard that's already been configured for you, and again, it's free to use. So it's there, it's already up and running, and you can take a look around it. And then from there, if you want to do the advanced metrics, which gets all the way down to like the number of puts and gets and other operational things, you can look at that as well.
All right, so we are on the home stretch here. You guys are doing great. Thanks for staying with us. So we've talked about what's native inside of S3, but we also wanted to talk about going beyond just what's available in S3. And we picked 4 additional capabilities. Some are services that we really wanted to kind of talk to you about. The first one is AWS Config. I don't know how many of you actually use AWS Config today. No, okay, that's not a lot of hands right now, but I think this is another thing for your organization to consider. If you're looking to set standards for your configuration, as the name implies, I would like my buckets to have Yuri's amazing replication rules enabled. I would like my buckets to have object lock enabled that Dave talked about today. I would like them to be versioned. How do I make sure that my organization is configuring their S3 buckets to our standards? Take a look at AWS Config. It has about 22 rules specifically for S3 configuration that can be checked and give you alerts, but my favorite is now it has the ability to have proactive rules, not just detective rules. So instead of just being notified that you're out of compliance and out of your configuration standard, now you can bring those resources into configuration, into a compliant configuration, as well as for new resources that are getting created, making sure that they're configured correctly during the creation process. So I really encourage you to take a look at AWS Config. If you need help with either checking the configuration standards of your buckets for the features we just talked about today, including security features like BPA, block public access, encryption, Config now can go into a proactive mode as well. That was just launched, I believe, at the beginning of this week or last week. So we're really excited about what Config can do for S3 customers. The second one is Amazon Macie. Anyone using Macie today? One? Okay, not a lot there as well. If you have healthcare data, HIPAA compliant data, payment card information, personally identifiable information, if you are storing that type of data in S3 today, Macie will help you identify where that is. Is it in the buckets that we've configured correctly with config, that we have versioning enabled, that we have object lock enabled, that meet all our organization's data protection requirements? Macie is the detective capability to go look inside of all your buckets and say, these are the buckets that contain sensitive information. We'll scan the buckets and then show you essentially where your most compliant data is located that may require, again, those layers of data protection. Do we have all of the layers of data protection needed for that type of data? We then have what we look to talk about for our storage partners. This one was sort of an interesting concept, and we wanted to spend at least a moment here to mention it. None of the features we talked about today are true, independent, centrally managed backup copies. Now, we have a number of services, though, that are from AWS and from our partners that support S3 backups. So if you're looking for a centrally managed backup solution, whether it's from AWS or not, we have partners that provide backup solutions that will create independent copies of S3 data, and we also have AWS backup that will also provide that from AWS. So there's a number of them on the expo floor here today. Go talk to them about S3 backup. That's something that a lot of our customers are asking us about, is how do we actually back up S3? In my time here at AWS so far, that's the biggest change I've seen in S3, is that it's no longer the destination for backup data. It now really is the place where you are creating primary production data, and you're asking for that data to be protected by your existing backup application, or maybe you're looking for a new separate backup application to create and have a centralized backup copy of S3. So that's why we wanted to at least mention that here and talk to you briefly about that. A number of our partners have solutions for creating a truly independent, centrally managed backup of S3. And then finally, guard duty for S3. If you're looking for help in looking at S3 access patterns, who is accessing what data in S3, is that an anomaly or is that a normal access pattern? Is that sort of a canary in the coal mine that we need to go kind of double click on to see, is that access pattern correct? Or is this possibly a bad actor that's looking to do something to my data in S3? That's Amazon Guard Duty for S3. So those are some of the supplemental solutions that we wanted to talk about and then transition into our key takeaways. Hopefully we've done a great job. I don't know, tell us on our survey. But we think we've given you some good prescriptive guidance on how you can supplement S3's 11 nines of data durability. This is something that we wake up every day and really focus on, is the durability. It's built into everything we do. And we do that so that you don't have to worry about building durable storage and managing that in your environment. You can focus on innovation. We manage the storage for you. So that's why we believe S3 is the safest place to store your data. Durability, availability, resiliency, those are our hallmarks for the last 16 years. I don't think we mentioned this at the beginning, but Dave, how many objects do we have roughly in S3 today? Did we say that?
It was 280 trillion.
280 trillion. We process over 100 million transactions per second. Those are your gets and puts and list requests. So that is what we wake up every day managing, so that you don't have to worry about that. You focus on innovation. But we also wanted to talk about those additional layers of data protection. And I think we tried to explain why, because mistakes happen. We have to honor those delete requests. We don't know if they are intentional, accidental, malicious. So those are the additional layers of data protection that we talked about. Business continuity is now a capability of S3 multi-region access points with the failover controls. Godzilla is a worry for you. Maybe it's not Godzilla. Maybe it's a fire, a flood, a meteor, zombies. Those are all things that lead customers to want to have the ability to press a button to shift their traffic over to an alternate AWS region at their leisure. And I think we've done our best to convince you or try and gently guide you to take a look at S3 Storage Lens. Dave, what's the price on S3 Storage Lens?
It is free by default. You already have the dashboard. Go in and look at it. You'll see so many graphs and ways you can look at the data. It's performance, it's pricing, it's data protection. It's everything pretty much at your fingertips.
That's right. And that will give you that bird's eye view to see Yuri's amazing replication engine and what percentage of your data you're replicating, protecting with object lock and versioning. And then finally, we tried to show you some of the additional options to layer on. We find that a lot of customers aren't aware that those capabilities exist outside of S3, so we just wanted to take a few minutes here and talk to you about those additional services. That's really the bulk of our talk. You guys have done great. Thank you for your time. We have object learning classes now. If you want to get a learning badge to be an object storage trained person, we have now object storage badges as a storage technologist to demonstrate your knowledge by achieving digital badges. Exciting. There we go. Our last one, I'm sorry, did you want to take a picture of that one? You good? Okay. We just wanted to say, I think, thank you. Come on up here, Yuri.
Yeah.
So we know you had a lot of choices. That's the end of our talk. We will stick around. If you have questions, we'd love to talk to you. But thank you all for your time. We hope you had a great reInvent this year. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.